certainly this October 7 attack on Israel by Hamas was quite a major attack. I think it was quite unexpected. The surprising thing is that for a long time, Israel, especially under Netanyahu, was focusing on the West Bank, was focusing on the Palestinian Authority run enclave, and really basically was leaving Hamas alone, thinking that Hamas is surrounded on all sides by Israel, including on the sea by the Navy, on the air by the Air Force, and by land. So there was really nothing very much to worry about so far as Hamas was concerned. So essentially they were paying a lot of attention to the West Bank. And they were paying a lot of attention in the sense of they were trying to improve security in the West Bank by being responsible for security. Now, back in 2003, I am reasonably certain that none of you were following that particular event very closely in 2003. The fact is that after Saddam Hussein, after Iraq was liberated from Saddam Hussein, the Americans appointed an American, Paul Bremer, as the administrator of Iraq. They had a bunch of people, including some Iraqi Americans, that is, Americans who were of Iraqi ancestry, as the advisory, as the group around Paul Bremer. Now, you just defeated the army of a country. You've overthrown an unpopular dictator. That's something which actually was a plus. At the same time, what have you done? You've gone and appointed one of your own people as the administrator of that territory. In other words, as the master of that territory. I think psychologically it was not the smartest thing to do. You could have appointed somebody from within Iraq as the wing. In hindsight, if you go back, you need not have disbanded the entire Iraqi army, because quite frankly, Iraq under Saddam Hussein and those of us who have been there during that time, if you were not doing exactly what Saddam wanted you to do, you had a bitter life. What little of it was left was very bitter, and your family and friends had an equally bitter life. So, whether you liked it or not, you had to loudly proclaim your loyalty to Saddam. There was no other choice. The same problem is there with Gaza. If you were not friendly to Hamas and you advertised that fact, and the administration got to know, they would do to you practically what they did to the Israelis on the 7th of October. They would catch you, they would torture you, they would kill you. There was no room for dissent. Just as in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, there was no room for dissent for anyone who was considered against Saddam. There was no room for dissent for anyone who was considered anti-Hamas in Gaza. But the mistake that was made was that the Americans took control and de facto functioned as occupiers. They came as liberators and functioned as occupiers. Now, I happen to believe that you have to understand there are people, Palestinian people, or generally people, but certainly Palestinian people, they're not intrinsically likely to turn to terror. They're not intrinsically likely to help terror organizations. And in Gaza, the overwhelming majority of the population was sick and tired of Hamas. But there was no way they could do anything about it, because if they expressed that loudly, they'd be in trouble. Now, from that point of view, you had a situation in which, over time, the Palestinian Authority, ever since Netanyahu came back to power, the Palestinian Authority was repeatedly humiliated. Gaza was by and large left alone. The assumption was that Hamas was basically dealing with its own people, and it was confined to a small little enclave surrounded by Israel. It's not really much of a problem. The problem was to make the Palestinian Authority completely subservient publicly to the Israelis. Now, for example, you have a lot of Israeli officials saying, why hasn't the Palestinian Authority condemned, in the sense, the terror attack? Why are they not doing that? And why are they, talking about us? Now, why has nobody in the Netanyahu government condemned the fact that you have settlers, illegal settlers, who have settled in different locations in the West Bank and taken over land there, taken over, olive gardens and various other assets that the Palestinians have there. And no one from the Netanyahu government has ever protested against that. Because politically, you'd be in deep, deep trouble with your own people if you protest. Anybody in Netanyahu government who protested against that kind of settlement would have a major problem with Netanyahu supporters in Israel. Those people who believe in a one-state solution. The root of this problem is on both sides you have individuals who believe in a one-state solution. You have Palestinians who believe Israel has no right to exist. And you have Israelis who believe Palestine is a fictional thing. And the whole thing is what is, correctly so, ancient Judea and Samaria. Now the reality is a lot of water has gone under all the bridges in the world, and even where there were no bridges, the new bridges that were constructed in the last 2000 and odd years. You can't revive the past. It's gone and done with. Today, modern Israel is fairly defensible. It's, maybe a little bit of territory here, a little bit less territory here, but the current boundaries of the state of Israel are reasonably defensible. In a way, it was not in 1948. The 1967 war ensured that Israel was able to win boundaries that were eminently defensible. But even after that, the problem was that security was, quote unquote, was being looked after by the Israeli side. No one else was involved. The Palestinians were not really involved in their own security. So the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority was basically challenged on the ground by the activity of Israel in its quest for security. You cannot blame them. They wanted security. But the reality is sometimes when you want security, you take recourse to actions that create more insecurity. And this is what has happened in the West Bank. Gaza, I would say that was not the problem. The problem was, quite frankly, that they were completely ignored. Hamas was not regarded as a major problem. In fact, Hamas was a sideshow. The real effort was on trying to keep the Palestinian Authority in a way in which they would openly proclaim Israel is a wonderful state, we love Israel, we can't live without Israel, which is impossible for any state to say. It's a little outlandish to think that you can do that. But then you have a hardcore of individuals in Israel, which form a large part of the constituency of the Netanyahu government, that actually believes in a one-state solution. That if you want stability, Palestine is Judea and Samaria. There can be no Palestine. In a sense, it's not the same as the other side, because the other side utilizes terror. Fortunately, that is not the case at all with Israel. There is no utilization of terror. But the reality is that ever since the Netanyahu government started getting dependent on a wafer-thin majority. And secondly, there were these cases against him. So it was hop, skip and jump away from jail. Now, whether it is Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu, when you push a very powerful politician to the point where it's either power or jail, the man will probably do anything to retain power. Because I don't think jail is a very pleasant place for anybody. You put this gentleman in that position that he could go to jail. The same thing has happened with Donald Trump. When Donald Trump became president, I mean, some of us gave public advice. I don't know if it ever reached him, but many other people, I think, gave him sensible advice, including, I'm told, within his family, his daughter and son-in-law. Don't touch Hillary Clinton. Don't go after her. The instinct of Trump was to go after her, prosecute her, persecute her, whatever. But he didn't touch her. What happened after that? Hillary disappeared. Dr. Vijayalakshmi follows, US politics like a hawk. Where was Hillary after the second or third year of Donald Trump? She was nowhere to be seen because nobody was bothered about her. On the other hand, Biden has gone after Trump with a vengeance. He's not only gone after Donald Trump. I mean, frankly, when you're in a business, to say that you're going to get by in a business by saying that, let's say for example, I'm in the business selling these phones. I'll dress it up. I'll tell you they're magnificent, they're this and they're that. I'm not going to tell you they're awful. Now, if you expect Donald Trump as a businessman to say his assets were awful, they're all terrible, you're expecting a bit too much. And if you start prosecuting him, if you start calling his children to the witness stand, it starts to look like political persecution. The person who built up Donald Trump into a possible second innings was basically, under the Biden administration, the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland. Now, Merrick Garland was a very fine federal judge, a brilliant federal judge, straightforward, honest, good in the law. Unfortunately, he was chosen by Barack Obama, unfortunately for him. And the Republican House and Senate, anybody who Barack Obama chose, almost anybody, could be the best jurist in the world. It could be anybody. No. Because Barack Obama chose you, I'm going to go against you. They went against Merrick Garland and he could not become a Supreme Court judge. Of course, Trump then filled the Supreme Court with people who were more akin to the way of thinking of many members of his own party. Merrick Garland is not political. And that is obviously why I'm sure he doesn't have any feeling of anger or whatever that under the Trump administration denied him a judgeship. It was not the Trump administration, it was the US Congress. I'm not sure that even if Donald Trump wanted to have Merrick Garland as a judge in the Supreme Court, the Republican Congress may not have agreed with him. I don't think there's any such thing. I think he genuinely believes there's a strong case against Donald Trump. There could be a case here and there against Donald Trump, as there is against so many other people in business. But you don't go after all kinds of people in business. And by going after Donald Trump and his family the way Merrick Garland has, the bad name has come on Joe Biden, and you've got now a revival of Donald Trump. The political revival of Donald Trump. If he goes to jail, even for a short time, it's almost a certainty he'll be elected president. The theory is that if he goes to jail, if he had cases against him, prosecutions, American people will walk away from him. They're swimming to him. If he goes to jail, the theory is that they won't touch him. If he wins the election in jail, as President of the United States, he'll have to be sworn in jail, and immediately he can pardon himself. As the President, he has the full authority to pardon himself. So he can walk out of jail a free man. And this time around, I'm not at all sure that he will do to Biden what he did to Hillary Clinton. In fact, I'm reasonably certain that Hunter Biden will not be the only Biden who will have some kind of trouble if there's a Trump administration. And the Trump administration is coming about, largely, if it comes about at all, it will come about because of the fact that he's being prosecuted, his family is being hounded mercilessly by the US Attorney General acting independently and possibly in what he regards the interests of justice. But if Merrick Garland had any sense of politics, if Biden was less emotional towards Trump, he could have stepped back and understood how helpful this whole thing is becoming to Donald Trump. Now, the rivals of Donald Trump can tackle a Trump who's out free without any such charge against him the way Hillary was, and who disappeared. It's impossible to tackle Donald Trump who's a victim and a martyr. Everybody feels sorry for him. So all his rivals who basically hate him are forced to say nice things about him and defend him. His biggest PR managers are the people who want to replace him at the top of the Republican ticket. So, as I said, when you're putting it that way, so what I want to mean is Netanyahu has the same problem. He's a very, a bit of a strong-willed chap. My view for some time has been that Netanyahu is like Ariel Sharon. A very strong guy, very patriotic, a very proud Israeli, but that doesn't mean that he does things that are very unwise. Ariel Sharon went and interfered in the Lebanon conflict against the Shia militia on behalf of the Maronite militia. The Shia belong to one religion, the Maronites belong to another religion. Israel had no what they call skin in the game. Whether it was Maronite militia or Shia militia, that is okay. I mean, Israel had no problem. Neither of them, so long as they were busy fighting each other, they would at least not be fighting Israel. It was actually a plus for Israel that they were fighting each other. But he interfered on behalf of the Maronite Christians, and the Maronite Christians got the upper hand, and they started, the militia behaved in a fairly atrocious manner against sections of the Shia community in Lebanon. As a consequence, Israel is the one country in the world where you have Khomeinist terror. You have Wahhabi terror. Again, I would like to say, I would not like to call Wahhabis Sunnis, because Sunnis are very different from Wahhabis. I would not like to call Khomeinist Shia, because Shia are very different from the Khomeinists. But the one place in the one country in the world that is suffering from Khomeinist terror is Israel. And that is directly traceable to the Lebanon conflict of the 1980s. So Netanyahu, frankly, by the way he was treating the Palestinian Authority, by the way he clearly does not believe in a two-state solution. He goes along with those people in his entourage who say openly there's only one state, and that is, the ancient, classical, biblical Judea and Samaria. Yes, it existed, but the world has changed since then. And as I said, the existing boundaries of Israel are quite enough for Israel. And you cannot wish the reality of the need of a Palestinian state away. You cannot wish the reality of the necessity of a two-state solution for peace in that particular region to come about. So you have got one state people on one side and one state people on the other side. Now, the one state people on the other side, Hamas is very definitely one state. It's not, you guys are good at looking up these things. Check the charter of Hamas. Most of the charter is almost the entire charter is about the destruction of the state of Israel. The subtext of the charter is that the Jewish community has no right to exist. Now, the point about the Jewish community, and when after 26/11 took place, one of the first comments I made was that Pakistan has made a horrible mistake. The ISI has made a horrible mistake. They've gone after the Jewish community. In 26/11, they focused on Shabbat House. You remember? They searched for the Jewish people there to kill them, and they did kill father and mother, but the nanny saved the child. I said that was a terrible mistake that the ISI has made, because now that is it. People are going to come after them, and frankly, possibly coincidentally, it was after that the Americans started realizing the problem that the ISI is posing. in terms of terrorism, etc. And as a consequence, what happened was that a lot more action was taken. Please send me an SMS. SMS. Yeah. So that is, what I'd like to say is the situation. Now, here in the West Bank, etc., you have a Palestinian Authority. Like it or not, that's the only UN recognized authority. No other authority is there. And if you want some kind of a puppet authority, recognized by Mr. Netanyahu's people and by nobody else, it's not going to work. It's not going to run. It's not going to function. You have to give self-respect to the Palestinian Authority, and that ought to have been given in the very beginning. Instead, Hamas was ignored and the Palestinian Authority was humiliated. So in other words, you are doing things supposedly to promote your own security, but actually harming the security of Israel. I happen to believe that Israel has a complete 100% case for existing. After what happened in the Holocaust, I think coming back to an ancient Jewish homeland was the least that could be done, and they came back to a homeland that they left thousands of years ago, the Exodus and things like that. So they have every right to exist there. But I also believe Palestine is a reality, and the Palestinian people have a right to the freedoms that are necessary for prosperity. Gaza, for example, if you look at the location of Gaza, you have an international airport in Gaza, you have a transshipment hub in Gaza, you have a big port in Gaza. Gaza can become a Singapore. It potentially can become a Singapore. What is making it unable to become a Singapore is the reality that it's ruled by a terror organization. So frankly, getting rid of the military wing of Hamas will certainly be a plus for the people of Gaza. Doing after that what Netanyahu says he'll do, putting Israel back in charge of security, not only there but in the West Bank, is a deadly mistake. The same kind of mistake that Sharon made by getting involved in the Lebanese thing. You have no business getting involved in the functioning of an independent state, so long as that state is functioning in a manner which does not harm your security and which promotes partnership. Now, India and Bangladesh, for example, under the previous Khaleda Zia, there was complete disconnect between India and Bangladesh. All links were snapped. So there was a lot of anti-India feeling. Now you've got Indian buses coming through Bangladesh, Bangladeshi buses coming through India, trains, transshipment, everything has happened. The hatred against India is much lower. There was a time, for example, when people in Bangladesh were saying, we don't want Hindu electricity. Now, Pakistan, the military in Pakistan were the first to launch that particular thing, that we don't want Hindu power. Now, all of us have experienced electricity. I haven't been able to make out the difference between, Muslim electricity, Hindu electricity, Christian electricity, Jewish electricity. It must be there. If smart people in Pakistan and Bangladesh say it was there, it must be there. But I'm not able to make it out. That's the only point. But today, nobody talks about that. There's a lot of Indian power going there. And I would like to just, say, please remember, I've always said, if you call yourself a nationalist, you're an Indian nationalist. You can't tag a religious tag to that and call yourself a nationalist or be called a nationalist. Because if you're a nationalist, the entire country is your nation. There's no just one, group of that country that's your nation. The entire country is your nation. So you're an Indian nationalist. And you can be proud of that. If you're anything else, you're not a nationalist. You can be called a sub-nationalist, but not a nationalist. So, again, may I say from that point of view, There is a background, I would say, to the way Hamas, which is a complete denier of the right of Israel to exist, which frankly is reminiscent of what happened 100 years ago in Europe. Groups that said that the Jewish people have no right to exist. If you look at its charter, it's very open about that. They have a problem, frankly, and that problem is something which is existential. It's very surprising that Benjamin Netanyahu, not only Netanyahu, but I don't know at what level of the Israeli establishment they understood this was a mistake. I mean, you could see in the demonstrations that took place in Israel before this horrible terror attack happened, how many people were against Netanyahu. So I'm very sure a lot of people in Israel understood that these policies were not leading to the safety of Israel, but to the reverse. Of course, once the attack comes, everybody stands together. Same thing happens in India, for example. Once there's an external threat, we all come together. But, so, frankly, Hamas, unfortunately, it's a terror organization that does not believe in the right of the Jewish people to have a state or even to exist themselves. It was neglected for a long time, and the attack came as a complete surprise. Now, I'd like to have more of a Q&A than this kind of a lecture like we saw yesterday. So, some of the individuals I work with, some of them are, present in some locations here, whatever. I'm not going to identify them, but they came across a lot of evidence that a very large country was basically backing Hamas in terms of technology, in terms of military planning, in terms of capabilities. And when you see this attack, you can see the very exact way in which the use of space has been used to map territory on the other side. You can see the precise way in which interception of communications, including, high security communications between security units on the Israeli side, have taken place. Those have been broken. This cannot have been broken without a very advanced country helping you. What I called, I think a few days after the attack, a superpower sponsor. And the idea was to create a conflict in one more zone in the world. Along with now Ukraine, you got one more conflict. So create 2 or 3 of these burning fires so that if there is going to be the need to light a fire next door, nobody will interfere. They'll be too busy fighting other fires to send any firefighting engines to fight the fire I am lighting. You understand? So this was a very planned in a very high-tech manner, carried out through information gleaned by high-tech in a low-tech manner, because certain parts of that boundary were almost empty. There was going to be a large party. It was a very, very important day. It was a very, very important festival. There was going to be celebration all around. The last thing anybody would think of was terrorism at that point in time, like the Yom Kippur War, when the Israelis were taken completely by surprise. Attack came on Yom Kippur, a holy day. It was taken completely by surprise. I think 73, if I'm not mistaken. So the point is, they were taken completely by surprise. The technology that enabled that surprise, the technology that enabled the location of those areas to enter, and the basic systems like bulldozers and all that were entered, motorcycles, bulldozers were enough after that. But technology did its work in mapping out the other terrain very exactly, including the resources, the security personnel, which at that point in time were very low in number. They attacked on a day when the security personnel were low in number. They were in about 10 or 12 different locations, easily vulnerable to a particular form of attack. That particular form of attack was carried out and they were neutralized. It was an extremely well-planned operation. I think the problem with Netanyahu faced was this he thought this was beyond the bandwidth of Hamas. I'm sure there were people in Mossad or in the other parts of Israel who had been maybe suspicious of some kind of high-tech help that Hamas has been getting. Possibly, but possibly at some level in the chain, that information is regarded as incorrect and disregarded. And we have seen this very frequently in operations involving data. At some level in the chain, somebody says you're talking nonsense, finished, cut off. That information doesn't go any further. The result that the policymakers who need that information don't get it. And they function on the basis of information that is incorrect. The correct information is there waiting for the bus, which never comes. The bus means to go up the system into the policymakers' hands. Possibly something like that happened. Because I can't believe that the entire Israeli system was clueless about the kind of assistance that Hamas was getting, when much lower tech groups and individuals had picked up bits and pieces of that for about 5 or 6 weeks before this attack. Which is why in Sunday Guardian, for example, we were very quick to come out with our assessment of this so-called what we call the superpower sponsor, and pointing about the high-tech, etc. And a few days later, of course, everybody started pointing out the same thing. So all I can say is, who was to blame for the attack? 100% Hamas. It was a terror attack. Terror is completely unpardonable and indefensible. But I think Hamas made a mistake that's going to cost it at least its military wing. A huge mistake, because the Jewish people have gone through unendurable suffering for more than 1,500 years. They have suffered multiple times. They have suffered a Holocaust in the last century. The horrible signs that Holocaust became evident about 100 years ago. You could see, hate pamphlets and, spitting on the streets and people getting angry. Very eerily, the same kind of thing that you're seeing now in streets in Paris, in streets in Berlin, in streets in New York, in some streets in Chicago. It's very eerie, but that same thing is happening exactly 100 years later. But the fact is that the Jewish people are determined never to let that Holocaust happen again. So Hamas has picked on the wrong target. Forget Netanyahu, forget his ministers, forget all the mistakes that were made by that government. The Israelis will not allow this kind of a danger to continue. They have faced existential danger as a people, as a Jewish people. They were set up as a Jewish state, and that memory is deep in their minds. That's why, as I said, 26/11, the ISI made a terrible mistake by explicitly going after that particular community in the Shabbat house, attack. Explicitly, without hiding it. That is a terrible mistake they made, and after that, the atmosphere changed, and India got significant help after that in taking care of terrorists in Pakistan. A lot more assistance was given, and our counter-terrorism operations were very much more benefited, whereas previously hardly any assistance was given. When we used to ask for help, for example, one of the few countries that would help us was actually Saddam Hussein's Iraq. When there were terror attacks in India, for example, when you had, in Kashmir, terror attacks, and there was a call, please, give us help on these terror networks because they're all over the place. Hardly anybody gave us any interesting data except Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which gave us a lot of data. And very interestingly, George Bush, either because he believed it or because somebody told him something which he believed, thought Saddam Hussein is something like Al-Qaeda. That Al-Qaeda is essentially, Al-Qaeda was trying to kill Saddam Hussein for the longest time. The Americans got to him first, but not for lack of trying. Al-Qaeda was trying to kill Saddam Hussein for a very, very long time. You go to Iraqi television during his time, you'll find presenters dressed, I mean, the way presenters are dressed, let's say, in Munich, or in Delhi. That's it. No difference at all. It was quite, in that sense, sociologically, very liberal kind of culture. Politically, very repressive. Sociologically, liberal. So, I'd only like to say that, when we are talking in terms of what this, I wrote this week, this Sunday, again, please have a look at it. And my prediction was that by the end of this week, now it's Friday, another 2 days to go, the IDF would have possibly wrapped up its hyperkinetic operations. And increasingly, it will be able to increase the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And you'll go into subcritical operations, that is mopping up operations. The 4-hour pauses that we are seeing every day, which has been announced, is actually an inkling of that. And as the situation, the mopping up operation becomes more successful, you'll find the 4 hours become bigger, finally become days, finally become weeks. If it's done now, Hamas can regroup. It's only got to be done when the back of Hamas is broken. But you have started that 4-hour pause. And if you check back in this thing, that front page story, you'll say that the forecast was, in a week's time, this hyperkinetic phase, what I call the hyperkinetic phase, will hopefully wind down. It better wind down, because the world is getting sick and tired of so many innocent Palestinian mothers, daughters, sons being killed. Palestinians are, they're like us, they're human beings. And you're killing, you can't say that this kind of thing is permissible in war just because it happened in Iraq and Libya and other places. The world has moved on since then. Nobody can justify what happened in Iraq. Nobody can justify what happened in Syria. Nobody can justify what happened in Afghanistan. But you can't justify what's happening here also beyond a point. And my estimate was, by the end of this week, the patience of the international community will be over. And the goodwill of Israel will be very significantly impacted for a long time to come. I saw some reports today that goodwill of the US and the Arab world will be impacted for a generation. No, I think that's too pessimistic a point of view. But certainly the goodwill of Israel. And if you are living, getting the goodwill of the people of the Palestinian community is important in the West Bank and in a post-Hamas Gaza. So the worst thing they can do is what Netanyahu announced. We are going to take control of security in Gaza. You had security in the West Bank and in Gaza. What happened to you? That's why I have suggested an Arab force. You can have help from Israel, you can have help from India, from the United States, that's fine. But it's got to be an Arab force that helps the Gazan people escape the tyranny of the terror organization. And certainly they should not be placed under the Israeli military. That would be a huge psychological blunder that would give a huge boost to recruitment of a new version of Hamas. Like you saw in the United States after Paul Bremer, you had different mutations of terror groups coming, finally ended up in ISIS. If I'm not mistaken, the state of, Iraq and Syria. Yeah. But so that would be a mistake. And I think it's important for friends of Israel. I regard myself as a very complete friend of Israel. I am an admirer of the Jewish people, frankly. I think they're the most talented people in the world. Per capita, they have done much more for human knowledge and for learning and for culture and for literature and for music and for almost everything, if I may say so. Strategy than any other community has. But I'd like to say, as a friend of Israel, don't make the mistake that Ariel Sharon made. And don't make a Lebanon out of the West Bank. That is not going to work. It has got to be Arab-led, because the Arabs are an ancient and proud civilization. the Palestinians also are Arab. And you got Oman, you got Bahrain, you got, all these other Arab countries. You have some Arab countries who have not got the memo that Wahhabism is bad. Saudi Arabia got the memo, but I'm sorry, Qatar has yet to get the memo. I'm a bit surprised because the Qatar royal family is actually a very highly intellectual family, very much involved in arts and culture. Why they don't understand that Wahhabism is yesterday's thing and they should go for modernism the way Mohammed bin Salman has in Saudi Arabia, I can't understand that. But anyway, forget that. This has got to be an Arab-led force because the countries that are most at risk of terrorism spreading beyond Israel are the local Arab states. Nobody wants that. Egypt doesn't want that. Jordan doesn't want that. Saudis don't want that. Certainly Palestinians don't want that. So that is the important thing in which you can have input. And, from Israel so that the security is overall maintained. But it has got to be Arab-led. You can't have, as in Iraq in 2003, Paul Bremer, some version of Paul Bremer as a de facto administrator of Gaza from Israel. You got to have a local Gazan who's there. And believe me, the vast majority of Gazans hate Hamas almost as much as the Israelis do. They hate them because they're, can you imagine being in a situation where, you can be sent, you can be executed, you can be attacked, anything can happen to you simply by saying that, the 28 leaders of Hamas who are millionaires and living in Qatar in 5-star luxury, what's wrong with them? Why can't they come and suffer like the rest of us? That could send you into a horrible kind of prison. And it's a fact. 28 of the top leaders of Hamas are living in Qatar. And most of them are millionaires. Of course, it's a wonder to me that either they knew nothing about this attack, even though they're top leadership, and if they knew something about the attack, the Qataris were not curious enough to find out what they knew. So I'm a little surprised by that. I'm assuming, I like to assume good things about people, that these 28 leaders were not told about the attack, nor was any of the other people of leadership of Hamas that were outside Gaza. I would like to be convinced that Qatar never basically eavesdrops or snoops on any of them. So Qatar would probably not know, even if they had known. I would like to assume those two things. But it's unfortunate that Qatar did not snoop. And it's unfortunate that if they were told, they did not communicate, because the worst thing Hamas could have done is what it did, launch that terror attack. I don't believe that the IDF is going to stop until the military wing of Hamas is broken. I would like it to be a quick campaign because of the terrible civilian cost. But nothing is going to stop the Israelis from completely breaking the military wing of Hamas. And I again repeat, judging by this 4-hour pauses every day and all that, I think the hyperkinetic phase is winding down and a new phase is coming. Once that phase comes, Netanyahu frankly needs to be removed from the scene. He's not the right person to lead Israel in a situation where you need peace and harmony with your neighborhood. He is a firm believer in a one-state solution. You need Palestinian leaders who believe in a two-state solution. You need Israeli leaders who believe in a two-state solution. I don't think that Mr. Netanyahu believes in a two-state solution, and that is why the morning after is much more important than the idea of doing a job for which it is beautifully equipped. There is no military more committed than the idea. You had, young Jewish boys and girls holidaying in India. They were enjoying themselves in Manali. They were trekking in Kashmir. They were going all over the place. Some of them they may have come to Manipal maybe. I haven't heard of that. As soon as the war started, as soon as it broke on the television screen, they were on the next flight back to Israel to enroll in the military. All of them. They knew they were facing a terrible situation. They knew they were putting themselves in harm's way. But there was not I mean, I've tracked about 12 or 13 of them through various things. Every one of them, not one person stayed behind. Everyone went back to fight. That is the will, the indomitable will of Israel. That will prevail. But my hope is it prevails in a timeline that ensures stability in the region. Because if it prevails over a length, that is why any call now, go slow on this, go slow on that, go slow on this, you are actually prolonging the agony. You need to go all out to break the back of the military wing. Once it is broken, the situation will start normalizing. If you go slow on this and that, it will take longer and longer. And each day that it takes longer, many more hundreds of people, innocent people, are going to die. And each such death is absolutely, it's completely, something which none of us can countenance. So let's hope that my forecast comes true, that by the end of this week, the hyperkinetic phase will be over and you will have the mopping up phase, because in that phase, you can allow more and more supplies to come through and more freedom of movement. Now you're seeing 50, 80, 1,000 people from North Gaza move to South Gaza. I think you will see an expansion of that in the next 2 or 3 days, which is good, because mopping up operation involves mopping up bits and pieces of Hamas. And for that, the sooner these people go there, the better. And the sooner ample supplies of assistance come from Egypt, the better. So I'm hoping that in the next day or two, the hyperkinetic phase will wind down and the mopping up phase will begin. But one thing I can tell you, the IDF will not stop until this problem is gone once and for all. The only point is, politicians who have no common sense should not in the process adopt policies that create such ill will that you have a new monster coming in place of the old, like what happened in Iraq under George Bush. Please, Mr. Netanyahu, please don't be a second George Bush. Better to resign. And secondly, although all of you who are trying to send him to jail, please give him an honorable retirement. Let him go, and let him go with his family with a good pension, and let him go to some vacation spot somewhere and let him live in peace. Don't persecute him, because that may help him to decide to retire. Thank you very much.